And hello, welcome back to Showing Up Whole, the place where we discuss balance in mind, body, heart, and spirit in every aspect of our lives. And today we are talking about a topic that excites me and confuses me at the same time, but it is something that I'm always desperate to learn more about. We are talking about quantum science. And I love when my guest Trina talked about it with me. We were talking about down the rabbit hole we go. That's what she coded. And it's like, yes, we are diving into the rabbit hole of quantum science with Trina Krug. Trina is a holistic nutritionalist, a holistic iridologist, and a certified health coach. She's dedicated to helping women live their best lives, complete with a happy body, happy gut, happy immune system, and happy heart. She is the host of the Quantum Energy and Healing podcast and the Mystic Realm podcast, which I was actually on a little while ago, so make sure you check that out, and enjoys geeking out about all things quantum science, which is what we are doing today. Here we go.
Yay. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you so much for coming in. It's what quantum science is a rabbit hole. And I don't know, I think quantum science for me, whenever I talk like quantum physics or something, I always just lean back on anything I learned in that movie, What the Bleep, a long time ago.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, down the rabbit hole. So let's start really basic as we head down the rabbit hole of quantum physics. How would you describe quantum science? What is quantum science?
At the most basic level, quantum science is the study of small things, like truly the building blocks of the universe. But here's the interesting thing about quantum science is, back in the day, we thought we had identified the smallest particles, right? And then along came quantum science and we realized, wait a minute, there's like much, much smaller things. And every time that we think we found the smallest particle, the definition of quantum science in terms of the observer effect, and we can go into that later if you want to, is that we're going to see something different. So the more we look and the more we dive down into that rabbit hole, the more we're going to find. And it's going to be this infinite thing. We're never going to get to that place where we find the smallest particle or the smallest this or the smallest that or this building block or that building block, because it's always going to go to infinity, which is mind-boggling at the same time as it is awesome.
I love that. I find that a fascinating thing because I guess there's some parts in this rather instant gratification society that we live in that you almost go, oh, is that a frustrating pursuit? To almost always know that you're going into something that's going to takes you through infinity, that is just always going to be discovering something new. So, and yet at the same time, when it's a passionate pursuit, there's something so exciting about that, which is just something always new to discover. All right. So we've got the study of small things. I've got to say that's the most beautiful simplicity statement that you could possibly drum up. I was not expecting you to go to that simple.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's so well contained. Why does it always seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it always seems like quantum physics, quantum science is a bridgeway between science and spirituality.
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay.
And that's what drew me to it.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's not the study of small particles per se that interests me. It's the implications of it when it comes to our spirituality and our understanding of our energetic blueprint and our vibration and all that. And so that is the lure for many people. And it is that gap, right? So there's kind of two groups of people that have interest in quantum science. These are the actual like scientists, the ones that, are like looking through their fancy equipment that I know nothing about and doing the actual observation, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the other group of people where I fall into, which is like, okay, let's take that data that they've learned and what they've learned about things like the observer effect. And then how can we apply that to manifestation?
Mhm.
and to what it means for our own body and our own energetic blueprint and what that can mean for our life. And so you are absolutely 100% correct on that.
Okay. And see, this is why it's always intrigued me. And I've always, because I love seeing everything from different angles. You and I
Mm-hmm.
talked about this before, this wholeness of encompassing the different reasons for things and different ways of perceiving things. So let's look at that for anyone listening in on this of how does it actually bridge that spirituality? We've got the science of small things, okay? And always going deeper and deeper. What does that look like? I mean, you mentioned already manifestation and energy and the observer effect. Let's start with the observer effect first.
Okay. And
What is the
that's a
observer?
great place to start, honestly,
Yeah.
because we can I can explain it in a way, hopefully, where it's tangible for people in terms of being able to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start with a real cursory explanation of something called the double slit experiment, which I'm sure that you've heard about, or have you not? If
Not
not,
sure if I have. Not to, maybe I
okay.
might once we actually hear it, what it
Okay.
is. Maybe I don't know the name.
Okay. So I'm just going to kind of I'm going to gloss over a lot of things only because we could talk for an hour about like the mechanics of it. But from a real basic level, imagine this. Imagine you have like a screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you put a piece of paper in front of the screen that has two slits in it. Okay. So, and then imagine shining a flashlight onto that paper. The light's going to go through those two slits and you're going to see it on the screen behind you, right?
Right.
Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Okay.
Completely.
So here's what they did. They did a lot of things actually, but here's one thing that they did. They took an individual photon, which is a little unit of light, basically, and they sent it towards this piece of paper. It's not an actual piece of paper, but just for simplicity's sakes, we're going to call it a piece of paper.
Sounds good.
They sent this photon towards this piece of paper. Now, what you might expect to happen is this photon is going to go through one or the other slits, okay? And it's going to land on the screen behind you. And then if you keep sending photons through, it's going to go through one or the other. And ultimately what's going to happen, we might think, is that you'll have like two bands that are going to appear on the screen behind it, does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
It would probably be in time with when you are actually shining them through. Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not what happened. What happened is when they sent an individual photon through, you got just one photon, mind you, multiple bands of light, more than just two, multiple bands that occurred on the screen behind it. What that is imagine that you have, you can think about it like if you throw a rock into a lake, it's going to expand out, the ripple effect is going to expand out. Now, you throw two rocks in side by side, the ripples are going to expand out until they hit, and then you get this like ripple effect, right?
Right.
So what was happening and what was showing up when you sent a single photon through was this interference pattern, this ripple effect that was happening on the screen behind it. So what that said was that it didn't go through just one, it went through both. The single photon went through both, okay? Which means that it can act as a particle or a wave. And so then they started scratching their head and they're like, well, this is interesting. So they set up like observation equipment to like look and to see what was happening. And when they did that, what they saw was they no longer got that interference pattern. They got what they expected to get, and that is that it went through one or the other slits. So what that said was that when there was no observer per se, this photon acted as a sea of potential, kind of everything at once. It didn't make a choice about what it was. And it kind of went through both. But once you introduced the observer, then it made a decision. Okay. And it chose which side it was going to go through. Okay. So this is what's called the observer effect. Now, given that we are made up of energy, right? And energy has the potential to be a particle or a wave, which means we kind of exist in this sea of possibility, right? Now, we can relate this to things like manifestation, where, when you think of manifestation, you think of like, we visualizing our future and we're like sinking into the energetics of it. And we're kind of like, we're observing that potential future. So we're drawing that into existence and we're making that sea of potential become reality, because we are in effect observing what our potential future is, and we are focusing in on what we want it to be. So it's kind of one way that you can draw the observer effect over into like real life. But the very, very interesting thing that I want everybody to take away from this is the fact that there is nothing that is set in stone. Nothing. Everything exists in a sea of potential. And it isn't until we observe it that it becomes reality, in which case every moment in time, there is that potential to shift what our reality that we are experiencing is, and that we are in control of that.
You know what you know what I love about that, of what it illustrates so well, is not just, we always think manifestation, we think law of attraction, we go, oh, what do you want to create? And it's like, oh, I want to create this. And the wonderful, convenient thing that we all love to forget is that we are actually manifesting all the time, that we are always creating. And that fits in so well, because whatever you are observing, it's whatever you're observing in that moment, that's what you're calling into existence. That is what you are. That's basically what you're saying. And so therefore, you can have the half-hour meditation visualizing your ultimate reality and feeling into it for that half hour. But if you're then spending the rest of your day focusing in on the news, or focusing in on even your bills, or whatever it is actually in front of you, then that's where that's what you're observing.
Yes. So and your thoughts, like it's not just, like people think of visualization oftentimes as, okay, I'm going to purposefully imagine a scenario, but our thoughts, that's visualization too. So when we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day, what are the majority of your thoughts? Because your thoughts is in fact your observation of your reality, and that's what you draw in. And so that's why like thoughts and emotion and feeling and all of that is so incredibly important, because you are creating this reality, and you're creating it through, you can think of it like the observer effect, but you are in effect creating your reality. And manifestation is not just all these wonderful, beautiful, flowery things that you want to bring into your life. Manifestation goes in all directions. Yes, it does. And so we draw in the positive, we draw in the quote negative. Is something ever really negative? No, it just is, right? But we label it as positive and negative, but we draw all the things into our lives. And so manifestation, the very convenient thing for us to do is to say, well, I didn't draw that into my life.
Yeah. It's what, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right that there isn't necessarily a positive or a negative. It's, it's just what you want or what you don't want. And they're both in equal balance to each other. It's just whether you want it or you don't want it, and which one you put more attention on. Okay. So I have to say too, that with the idea of the observer self, like the observer effect, there's a lot of different places you can go with that. I've talked to other guests on the show, and we've talked about the actual observer self, that we observe who we are. And so therefore it's an interesting space to take it to, isn't it? Where you're actually observing your physical self, or who you are. And so therefore then that helps you in telling the story. So the observer position is always such a seat of power. And yet for so many people, it's actually hard to actually shift into that perspective. So I think it's an interesting space to take this scientifically. So,
and it's a beautiful place to be when people are in a place in their life where they're like, I don't understand why I am where I am. I don't understand why I'm drawing in the reality. And maybe they haven't gotten to the point yet where they're in acceptance of the fact that they're drawing in that reality, but still they are in their experience, and they're not understanding it. And so, our subconscious minds controls what, like 90-95% of our reality. Like we're just on autopilot most of the time. And it's our programming that is just running in the background, and it's dictating our decisions, and it's dictating our course in life, really, because we're kind of on autopilot. Now, when I work with people in that space, what I always tell them is to just become the observer of yourself for a day, just for a day. No judgment. Yeah. Don't judge. Don't, like, when we know that people are watching us, we change our behavior. We become more conscious versus subconscious when we know someone's watching us. Okay. So become the observer without changing your behavior. Okay. Just be who you are. Feel what you feel, think what you think, decide what you decide. Just be the observer.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it brings about this awareness. And once you have that awareness, then you can start identifying this subconscious programming that you otherwise wouldn't be aware of. So bringing in that observation is always a beautiful tool to be able to navigate not only how you got to where you are, but where you're going.
Is there an aspect of it? I hope this is going to take, we're going now 2 steps down the rabbit hole. Okay. So you're observing yourself and you're observing your habits. But by observing it, are we drawing, is it more prevalent there? Because that's, I guess, where the judgment comes in. Because if you judge it, then you're going to, because you're observing it, then it's going to be more present. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
you know, like whenever I think quantum physics or quantum science, like actually before this conversation, I told my son, I was like, oh, well, you know, having a conversation about quantum physics tomorrow. And he was like, okay, so wait, what is exactly quantum physics? I think there's a game that they mentioned quantum in or something like that. And he's like, what's quantum physics? And I was like, well, and my basic version, not as good as yours, was basically that, you know, the idea is that that everything's always flashing on and off, and that when you observe it, that's when it's on.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. So in answer to your question, if you stay in observation, then yes, then you will continue to draw that in, which is why I say just observe yourself for a day. Okay. Right. Is it going to change anything? No. Observe yourself for a day. And just the simple act of observation, like I said, brings about awareness, which will inherently start the shift of your vibration, because you're going to identify the things that you otherwise couldn't identify as happening because it was going on underneath. So just this simple act of observation will start bringing about this, what's the word when things start happening one after the other, whatever, but it'll start bringing about this shift just by the awareness that the observation. But yeah, if you stay in just observation forever, then yeah, you'll just continue drawing in the same thing of what you're observing.
Okay. So, and then it's always that next challenge, isn't it? I mean, if we're talking about manifestation, which seems to be kind of we're actually moving into, it's the ability to observe something that you don't see yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that often chokes people up, because it's almost a flip around of what our brains have been programmed to do. And that is observe what is. And so therefore, because you're observing what is, then that's the light that's the most active, and that's what's present in your life, and hence, etc., whatever. And then, but it's actually observing what you don't see in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, that is in a visual sense is also whatever you see in your imagination.
Yeah. And again, that awareness is key, because of the fact that we just sleep through our lives for the most part, and we don't think that we are. And, you know, they say that the most conscious that we are is when we're falling in love. Have we talked about this before?
No.
Okay. So the most conscious that we ever are is when we're falling in love. And this is because we want this person to like us, right?
Oh.
And we want to do things for them. We want to do all these things and to be in a certain way. So we are actively making decisions. Actively. We are not letting our subconscious programming run the show because we want this thing. We love to fall in love. We love to feel love. And so it's the most conscious that we ever are. Now, what happens then is after a few months, we start letting our subconscious programming come back in, and then we get in a fight with our partner and we're like, I don't know who you are. You know, it's like, right? Because their programming is starting to make the decisions, and our programming is starting to make the decisions. So we've now let our conscious decision making take the back burner. And hence when the problems start coming into play, because we went to sleep again.
I find that fascinating. One thing that comes up to me though, and I think it's important to actually have this conversation just for anyone listening, is the concept of toxic positivity. And because that there's an interesting relationship in that, right? Because one thing, I mean, as even when I was a parent coach, or even just as a life coach now, one of the things that, when people come up to me with problems about their relationships, the first thing I do is, okay, let's make a list of what we appreciate about them. Because where attention goes, energy flows. It's like, okay,
Yep.
let's actually, let's remember who they are and why we love them, and what's working.
Mhm.
And just that simple step will often change the relationship dynamic. However, it is an interesting thing where I guess the hot topic now is to not cloud over certain things, because then that can be toxic. So how does that work with quantum? How does that work on that level? How do you find that? What have you been leaning into that? Or is that something you've leaned into?
Um, so define toxic positivity in the sense that you're talking about. Like give me a concrete definition and
I
then I'll go from there.
I suppose, see, I am a very optimistic person. So I always look for the best. I look for the things to appreciate. I look for what's working. I acknowledge what isn't working. I can say, okay, that's not working, but what is working? So therefore, the what's not working is a launching place for what is. For many people, and I want to clear this up because some people might feel this way when they're listening to this podcast. For some people, they would term only looking for the positive is toxic positivity. So therefore, then they kind of stick a big happy face sticker on any situation and go, okay, I'm only going to look for the good stuff, and I'm going to ignore all the other stuff. And so therefore, if they are in a relationship, they might hear the relationship conversation of, okay, so therefore, if I'm in a disagreement, we should pretend that disagreement doesn't exist so we don't draw more attention to it.
Oh no, I don't agree with that.
No,
No.
so therefore, but it's an interesting place that this could go, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
and I sometimes do have conversations with people who are in this space of, oh, I don't want to draw attention to anything negative. And
Okay,
this
I
is a
see what you're
very,
saying
you
now.
know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
and you go, yes, that's true. But at the same time, from the observer position, you do have to acknowledge what's not working. So can we kind of
Yeah.
dive into that a little bit? Because I find
Okay,
that
sure.
it's a fascinating little hiccup in this, where some people kind of put the rainbows and unicorns look, which a lot, I hate people have accused me of that. But I actually am not like that.
So I think the way that you can look at it is we can't control anybody other than ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't change your experience. I can't change your reality. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say you and I are in a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship can be mother daughter, friend, like just
Yeah.
relationship in general, right? It doesn't have to just be a romantic relationship.
I love you, Trina.
Uh, so I love you too. So you and I are in a relationship. Now, I I am responsible for my experience. You are not responsible for my experience, right? I
Mhm.
can't say to you, you made me angry. And that's going to ruffle some feathers. But I can't say to you, you made me angry, because you didn't make me angry. I chose to be angry and I chose to respond in a certain way. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't have the ability to set up boundaries, but you are not in control of my feelings and you do not make me feel a certain way. Okay.
Yes. Very
That
well
is
said.
important. That is a
Very well said.
once we move into that and we take responsibility and control over how we feel and how we act, it puts us in a whole new ball game, right? Because now we're taking responsibility. We're not pointing the finger and saying it's your fault, you did this, because then we're no longer looking at what we are contributing to the situation, right? Now, having said that, with back to kind of what you said about ignoring the negative, so to speak, and only looking at the positive due to the fact of what we want to bring into our life and all that kind of stuff. So when you do that, essentially your boundaries perhaps are not set up properly. Okay. So we can love someone and we can even have unconditional love for someone, but choose not to have them in our life. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So we can still set up boundaries and have boundaries that are our own self-respect and are our own parameters for how we want to exist in our space, in our life, in our experience, on our path, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we acknowledge the things that we don't like, it's not like we're going to continue to draw that in, right? Because we learn from things, right? We learn from things. We cannot change without adversity, and we don't learn from only positives, right? It's the failures, it's the negative, it's all these things that allow us to grow and to change and to learn. So if we take that thing that we don't like, and instead of like focusing on it and being like, oh my gosh, I hate this, it's they're doing this and they're doing that and it's horrible, and instead we choose to learn from that, and maybe choosing to learn from that will grow the relationship and it will change the experience on both sides, or it will allow us to put up a boundary. So that's kind of my take on that.
Okay. No, and I think that's a really powerful take. And I suppose too, the fascinating thing is that there's this element to me that seems like when you take the happy face sticker and you stick it on top of a problem, it seems to me that subconsciously there's still an awareness of the problem underneath the happy face sticker. So therefore you do have to actually ask whether more attention is actually going to it. That is, if you acknowledge it, shine light on it, get some air to it, and then start visualizing the outcome after it's resolved and start giving space for it to grow too.
Right.
It's the same thing with a relationship with money. You know, right now we find ourselves in a position where globally everyone's talking about, you know, cost of living crises and different price things and et cetera, et cetera. And it feels like in that there is this aspect where I hear a lot of people who are in the spiritual field that be like, no, don't worry. It just means that you do this and you just do this and it's all okay and everything. Oh, you just charge more if you need to pay more. And it's all of this conversation.
Yeah.
And you go, that's true. And yet acknowledge the different energetic platforms underneath all of that. Because it just feels like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, but I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to
It's spiritual bypassing, but by a different name.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And maybe I should have called it spiritual bypassing rather than toxic positivity, because it still is this, it's a fascinating take on reality because we do understand. I think over the last 20 years, 25 years, there's become a platform where it's like, okay, where you put your attention, that's what you get more of. And yet people are tending to think, and maybe this is where we need to talk about, is it's not just your attention, like you said, what you see with your eyes or what you speak, and even deeper than what you visualize. It seems like there's a deeper level of what you're observing. What do you think? What is that?
There is. And, you know, I wholeheartly agree that you can't bypass, you can't ignore the things that aren't a vibrational match for you.
Yeah.
Or for where you want to be, right? It would be like, you know, if my husband was doing something that was hurting me, and maybe he didn't know, right? Or maybe he did, I don't know. But if I ignore that and just be like, well, I don't want to put my focus or my attention on that because then it's just going to make it happen more, right? That's not like what my subconscious is going to do. It's going to put up a wall. It's going to put up a protection. It's going to change how I respond to things. So it's going to, and here's what's interesting as I'm listening to myself talk, I'm observing my own speech.
Observing yourself.
Yeah. But that's almost putting more focus onto it because you're changing your energetics behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
And so you are almost in a way contributing to this thing that you don't like by ignoring it.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. And I think that this happens more than we actually give credit to, where it's like, you know, we talk about, oh, don't observe what you don't want. But also by not acknowledging it as a thing that you don't want, by just kind of pushing it in the corner, it feels like we have to take a lot of energy to actually keep it there.
Yeah. And that's where boundaries come into play, you know,
I think that's really,
yeah, boundaries, energetic boundaries are crucial. And I think there are so many spaces today where we're taught that boundaries are bad, and they're not bad. Boundaries can be good. Boundaries in a relationship can be incredibly healthy and can help foster that relationship. It's not a wall. It's a boundary. And this boundary is your parameters again for the things that make you feel good. And like being able to exist in that energetic space for your own personal growth. And if the people in your life respect those boundaries, then they're assisting with your growth and you're assisting with their growth. If they don't respect those boundaries, then that's something that needs a little bit more attention. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And I think it's a fascinating thing to bring in the concept of boundaries. I always see boundaries as, rather than walls, they're fences. It's like, they're just like little lines. But to bring that into a concept of like a quantum boundary. How do you feel into a quantum boundary, like in an energetic boundary? What does that look like for you?
To me, that looks like it's a vibration, right? And it goes back to the law of resonance, right? Resonance, like we draw in that which we are closely matched with. Which again, a super simple example is, I just bought a green car, right? I'm sure this is a super popular example. I just bought a green car. Now I see green cars everywhere, right?
Right.
Are green cars suddenly more popular? No, but it's in my field of awareness. Right. So energetically, it's coming into my presence and it's coming into my awareness. Whereas before, I had no interest in green cars. Therefore, my brain filtered it out and said, this is irrelevant. It was there, but it got filtered out as irrelevant, which is a good example for what we think about. We actually draw in, because now we're bringing it into our field of awareness. Maybe it was always there, but we kept it out. Whereas now we're focusing on it. So our brain is like, oh, well, this is what she wants, right? Or he wants. So we're going to bring this in and draw it in. And it's now going to become the reality and the truth of our experience.
Beautiful example. Beautiful example. Okay, so let's get practical quantum physics, which we already are talking about, but a little bit. I'm curious about, how do you use this in your everyday life?
So using it in your everyday life is understanding that at the most basic level, we are all energy. Okay. And there's this thing called the quantum field, which is a super cool place. The quantum field, to me,
I love the quantum fields, but I want to hear you describe it.
The quantum field encompasses everything from like, I can explain Reiki with respect to the quantum field. It's like this, science used to tell us that what percent, I don't know, 90+% of the universe was like empty space. Well, now we know that it's not empty space.
It's not exactly true.
It's energy, right? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. We know this, okay? We were taught this long ago. And here's the interesting thing about that. That means the energy of all possibilities is there. Okay, so the quantum field holds the energy of everything, but it also holds all possibility, all that was and all that is and all that can be. Okay. And so I love to use the example of a sundial. And I forget if we talked about this on the podcast that we did or not, but, we hear things like quantum jumps or even manifestation. And here's how you can use quantum science in your everyday life, understanding that the quantum field holds all energy and all possibilities. Imagine yourself standing in a, like how a child would draw a sun, right? A circle with a bunch of spokes coming out of it. Okay. You're standing in the middle of this and you're walking. Okay. And the path that you're walking is the spoke that's, directly out from you, because that's where you're most energetically aligned. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Quantum science tells us is we're going to draw in what we are a vibrational match to. Now, if you want to shift this, if you want to change your most possible and probable future, then you have to shift those spokes. You have to shift that dial, right? Which means you have to shift your energy. You have to shift your vibration. And when that happens, that dial can then shift, and you can just keep walking as that dial is shifting. And now you're going into a different probable, possible future. Oh, I just got caught on my water, versus where you were aligned previously. So that is the most tangible, but still kind of out there example of like, it's something concrete where in your mind, you can kind of visualize that, and visualize like this whole quantum jump thing, going from this reality to that reality is very difficult to comprehend unless you think of it in the example that I gave, that it's really not that difficult to to think about when you think about it as when you're shifting your vibration, you're shifting the energetic match to your most probable future. Okay.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
that's the best way to think about it in terms of like, how can I utilize quantum science in my life? It's truly the knowledge and the understanding that all that can be exists in this field. And you just have to energetically align yourself. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to energetically align yourself? Because that's probably a question out there, right?
It
It's
very well
easy
could
to
be.
say.
I was actually just going to ask you to clarify that, but you go right ahead.
Yeah. So it's easy to say, have the vibration that you want
Yep.
to draw in. Okay. But what does that mean? That means several things. So let's say that I want to become this woman over here, who's me, but I want to become her.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yep.
the first thing to acknowledge is that I already am her.
Yes.
Okay. I already am her. I don't have to become her. I already am her. And once you decide that's your first energetic shift. Okay. But going beyond that, everything is energy. Everything has a quality to it. Everything has an energetic vibration to it. A thought does, a feeling does, a thing does. So if you look at that, like, I want to be her, again, you already are her, but let's, for the sake of this example, say that there's this her that you want to get to. Well, what does she look like? What is she feeling? What is she doing?
Mm-hmm.
What is around her? All of that is energy. All of that
Yes,
has a
absolutely.
specific vibration.
Yep.
So when we say align your vibration with that which you want to become, or the place that you want to go, simply means your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, all of the things that you want to become, you create right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't physically create it, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Unfortunately, we are bound by time in this reality, right? Outside of our reality, time is more
I was just going to say,
questionable,
in
but
this reality.
that's another rabbit hole to go down. But for the sake of our existence and our reality, we are constrained at least a little bit in with time. So some things take time. But when you can align yourself with the vibration of the attributes, for lack of a better word, of where you want to go, that's when you're going to start shifting that dial, and it's going to start aligning with the place that you want to go to.
I love that. That's very, very beautiful description. It's one thing that I can't remember if I read it or how I came about it a few years ago, but I remember kind of diving into the idea that when you can actually feel into the image of what you want, when you can actually start, and even when you actually first get the idea, then you are already halfway there. Because you've kind of created that image from all of the things, observing what you don't want, and therefore by knowing what you don't want, you know what you do want, and therefore within that you start to kind of construct this destination, and then within that, all of a sudden you start getting the feeling of it, and it's almost like a radio signal that starts feeding back to you. And as soon as that's there, it means that you can start following down that path. It's like,
and that's a beautiful example, by the way. The like, think of the old school. I mean, the younger kids nowadays don't understand that we used to have to like turn the dial,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, but it's a beautiful example because it's exactly what happened. So each radio station we can think of as a different reality, a different possible future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we're turning the dial, there's all this static until we get clear on what that vision is. And when we do, suddenly that radio station comes in, like it's a direct download.
Yeah.
We just have to get clear.
Out of curiosity, and I could talk to you all day about this, I've got to say, out of curiosity, there often seems to be a little bit of a rebound. And I mean, we had talked a little bit, don't put your attention on things in the observer state for too long, because that's when it builds up power. But there also does seem to be a little bit of a rebound, because often when you start turning that gear and you start putting attention on the new reality, it's like the old paradigm. Sometimes just in our neural pathways, there's part of your brain that doesn't want the new habits and the new change. Yes. So it kind of, there's often a reality I suppose it's a bit of a phoenix rising sometimes that can come, where all of a sudden you can feel this old reality pulling at you. And there's a little bit of a disharmony as you find harmony. And it always feels like it's like it gets louder and louder trying to catch your attention again, I suppose.
Do you know why that is?
No, that I'm curious. I'm curious about what you're going to say about this. I have my own ideas, but I'm curious about yours.
Yeah. Okay. So we have something called an ego. And people think of the word ego and they think of a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Our ego is like our, in part, like the primal nature of who we are, the primal nature of our subconscious that wants to keep us alive, right? Yeah. Doesn't want us to die. Now, here's where it becomes interesting. Because sometimes we think of, living as more than just breathing and existing and whatnot. I mean, truly living is, but at the most fundamental level, it's being able to eat and to breathe and to
wonderful survival
have shelter,
brain.
Basic survival.
Yep.
And that's the responsibility of the ego. Now, when we find ourselves in situations where maybe we want to lose weight, or we want to change jobs, or we want to do whatever it is that we want to do, we have to start stepping outside the box a little bit, right? And when we do that, our ego says, no, 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 that is scary. I don't know what's outside that box. I need you to stay back in here in this comfortable box. Even if you're not happy, even if you're not healthy, you're living, you're surviving. And so your ego wants you to stay in that box that it knows is safe. Yeah. So that's why when you start stepping outside that box and you start feeling that resistance, you have to be okay with existing in discomfort.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put.
And discomfort does not mean bad. It just means you're in the crux of change. Yes. But people also sometimes don't like that discomfort. And so until you become comfortable with discomfort, you're generally going to go back to that box. And it's not, the ego's not trying to do a bad thing. It's just trying to keep you safe. It's a primal
100%.
thing.
100%. Now, what's fascinating is, speaking in quantum physics, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's also finding that little narrow pathway of, whereas you acknowledge the survival brain and acknowledge the old paradigm trying to keep you where you are, you also don't want to shift your attention to too much of the crumbling old paradigm, because therefore then that's what you're going to notice and that's what you're going to actually empower more of. And that's what I love about the rabbit holes of quantum physics, is because it's literally like, that small shift in attention versus, the really big gestures. It's just a small, oh, look over there. Oh my, everything's falling apart in my old reality while I'm trying to make this new shiny reality. Oh, what's falling apart? It's as simple as that.
It's important to acknowledge things, right? Yes. If we completely ignore it and just pretend that it doesn't exist, that's when we run into problems. It's okay to acknowledge it and to allow it into our awareness and allow it right out, right? Yes. Allow it right out. But we can still acknowledge it. We still allow it through our awareness, because being aware of things, again, is important, because that's what helps our shifts. Yes. So like, it's not like something comes into our awareness and because it's in our awareness, suddenly like that's where we're going to go. It is important to become aware of something. We just don't want to get like hyper fixated on it. Yes. It's like the negative thoughts, like when we're working through, like, let's say there's something really difficult that we're working through in our life, and we're on that, like, sometimes we get in that space of like on eternal repeat of all of the bad, playing out this movie of all the bad things that are going to happen. Right. Yeah. And when we try to change that, it's sometimes difficult. And what I tell people is, like, when those thoughts or those movies start coming into your field of awareness, just be like, okay, yeah, I see that. And then you let it go. And they're like, well, but then the thought just comes right back. And it's like, yep. And you do it again. Yeah. Yeah. And you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again until you don't have to anymore.
Yes. And I think that the word acknowledging versus giving all of your energy to, like, there's such a shift, and it's really important to lean into that difference of the fact that you're just acknowledging it. It's just like, something floating along the surface, and you're like, oh, look, there it is. You don't need to give it all of your attention. It's not going down the deep dive within it. It literally is just giving an acknowledgement and watching it fly past.
And you don't need to judge it either. You don't
And
need to say,
without
oh,
judgment.
this is, yeah, don't judge it. Just allow it to go through. And it's like, when I talk to people who are just finally understanding that they're an empath, for example,
Yep.
and they struggle with like, okay, I'm in a room with someone and I can feel all these things that they're feeling and I don't like it. And I don't know what to do, and tell me how to shield and all this. And
Yep.
I'm not a shielding kind of person. Like
No, I know I'm
I
not.
don't subscribe to that at all.
No.
What I tell them is like, acknowledge that feeling and then transmute it and send it back with love. So it's just this fluid thing. It's no judgment. It's just, you feel it, you acknowledge it, you transmute it, and you send it back.
Just to dive in, because we both just said that we are both not believers in shielding. I mean, people have actually asked, oh, how do I protect myself from that? And I'm like, I don't like, as soon as you say the word protection to me, I go, oh, that's giving attention to what you need to protect yourself from. And that's just creating this icky energy field. And so out of curiosity, why would you say you're not a shielding person?
Because I think, like, to me, and this is just my personal thoughts on it, right? It takes away the sense of power. And it says, I'm not strong enough to be able to handle this. I need something to keep this away from me, versus being a powerful, amazing being of light. Yes. That can exist in all things and can transmute the things that don't serve me.
Oh, I love that. That is very well said. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that definitely sums up what I've always felt along that. That. Okay, I truly could just keep talking and talking and talking, but I want to make sure that everyone knows how to work with you. Do you do work in this field, or is this something that flows through your other ways of working?
So it kind of flows through my other ways of working. So, how I work with people everywhere from life coaching to nutrition coaching to energy work to sound healing. And most recently, I've introduced holistic iridology, which is a fascinating field, which to me brings in a lot of this like quantum vibration. Because for people that don't know what holistic iridology, like in its most traditional form, is looking at the iris of your eye and being able to see predispositions for health conditions, right? It's a beautiful science. Holistic iridology takes that one step further, and it understands and acknowledges that there is a thought and an emotion behind everything, every illness, every disease, everything. And so basically, when we are born, and even prior to when we're born, we have a vibration of our ancestors, our genetic blueprint, if you will. And this genetic blueprint and that symphony of vibration is imprinted on our iris. So when we're born, we can look, and even, like it's there when we're born, but we can look at it when we're born or when we're 50, it doesn't matter. But you can see what your genetic blueprint is for health conditions, for spiritual predispositions. What are you going to believe in? What do you feel called to believe in? Your emotional patterns, your thought patterns, it's all there. And so it's this, it kind of takes, like, people say, oh, well, this runs in my family, right? Well, we know with epigenetics, like that's irrelevant anymore, because we can turn on and off our gene expression, right? But with holistic iridology, we can look at our genetic and ancestral blueprint and say, okay, here's what you're more predisposed to. Are you predisposed to feeling like you're out of control all the time? Are you predisposed to potential breast challenges, colon challenges? And then shift your vibration so that those aren't realized, right?
I love it.
And because if we live within our vibration of our genetic blueprint, then the likelihood of that genetic blueprint being realized is much, much higher.
Of course it is.
So the core of what I do now is looking at that genetic blueprint. And again, that's not just physical, it's emotional, spiritual, and mental. And then working with people with these other healing modalities, with nutrition, with energy work, with all of the things, to be able to shift their vibration so that that genetic blueprint that might not be in their best interest, per se, isn't realized. And so I kind of have this toolbox of self-healing, which really is the root of what I do. And that is the empowerment of people that they have the ability to heal themselves.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so exciting. It's funny because I was talking to someone recently and we were talking about a condition that they had. And it was an interesting thing to lean in an energy session to actually feel the frequency of the condition they had. And you could feel the actual frequency of it. And
Yeah.
then exploring what frequency was the opposite of it or what would actually like release it. and
Mhm.
and it's a fascinating thing to actually be able to do that from before it actually manifests within
Right.
them to actually that's beautiful.
It
That's true
truly
magic.
is a like preventative tool for
Yeah.
healthcare. And again, healthcare, predominantly people think of physical, and it's not just physical, but it truly is a preventative tool to be able to look into the frequency and the vibrations and things. Now, my father died of colon cancer.
Okay.
If you look in my eye, I have a lot of colon indications, in my eye. Does that mean that I'm destined for colon cancer? No.
No. No.
I can change that frequency. I can change that vibration. I can be aware of it. I can do specific things for colon health that
Yep.
maybe I wouldn't have otherwise. There's so many things that I can do to not have that gene expression come into fruition. And that is invaluable information,
That is
especially for
invaluable.
people that might not know their genetic history and might not know that, hey, you are predisposed perhaps for some breast challenges, or maybe you're predisposed for, feeling like anxiety, or I gotta be in control about this. And you're not understanding that's part of your genetic predisposition. So how can we work with that to
Yep.
start releasing some of that, so it's super, super cool.
That's amazing. Okay, so now everyone really needs to rush over to your website. So where are we sending them?
So you can go to my website if you want. It's Holistic Fit for Life.
Okay.
I'm not as big of a Facebook person as I should be, but I do
There's no
have a
shoulds.
Facebook page and group, Quantum Energy and Healing, and I'm sure you can hook people up with all
Yep.
that.
Will do.
But yeah, I work with people both in person, but I also do everything virtually, because that's just the space that we're in nowadays. I'd
It's the
love to be
wonders
able to
of the
reach people
world.
all over. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, I know. Absolutely. This has been fantastic. Thank you for the deep dives of
Yeah.
magic with me. Oh, I
I
swear we
love
could talk and
talking
talk
about
and
stuff
talk.
like this. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to just share the information and also have a wonderful conversation that just gives me so much joy and pleasure
No,
too.
thank you so much. It gave me so much joy too. We'll have to do it another time. So thank
Yes,
you.
definitely.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.